I'm Tom. Can you come upstairs, please? It's a really important meeting. I'm so sorry. Is that okay? Thank you. Hello, Carl.
Hello.
Wonder where everyone is.
Is there anything crazy with time with daylight savings? Is that over?
We're synchronized now, so we're starting in, now.
Okay, yeah, because that caused so much more problems than Y2K ever did. I had servers I couldn't access for 3 weeks back when they made the change, like from the whole part of April. I mean, the whole, like 3 weeks, I guess in March and stuff, I couldn't access anything because it thought the server thought we were an hour earlier or whatever.
Yeah, funny things like that. So this meeting today is based on last Monday's, where we were going to be dreaming a little bit about what working in VR can be without much constraints. Just so you know about the context of the beginning of our discussion today.
Okay.
Just checking a few things here.
Yeah, this is one of the best photographs I took. I was practicing the panorama there with this is out in Santa Barbara.
Oh, that's a Santa
Sunrise.
Barbara is beautiful. A nice
Yeah.
picture too.
Yeah, it's the Hilton. It was called the Fest Parker. And it's now just like DoubleTree by Hilton or like that.
Right.
That's where we have our big conference and graduation ceremony in January. Hopefully it'll be happening again, although it's going to be January 2024 for me. I'm taking a break from school and kind of going back to the basics.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So, yeah. Hello, Fabienne.
Hello, how are you doing?
I was just thinking if everyone from Monday had actually entered at roughly the same time, I could have said, hello, dreamers. And that could have been the start of some kind of a science fiction franchise. But anyway, here's Mark as well. I'll say to him then, hello, dreamer.
Yeah,
Have you all seen Equilibrium, the sci-fi movie with Tom Cruise? Are you an effective team? So memorable, isn't it? That little audio snippet.
Yeah, I never got to spend that much time with Doug, but every time I did, he always told the story about getting to a meeting early. And as he walks in, it's like, that Engelbart, he's just a dreamer.
Mm.
It was like, I have a real problem with that word just, because being a dreamer is hard work.
Exactly. That's what we're going through now.
I think the equilibrium thing, that was what I used to send to my supervisor if there'd been a bit of a break in communication. So I just used to send, are we an effective team? And I always got a reply.
Yeah, that's good. It's an amazing movie. The story is so-so, but the atmosphere is incredible. Hi, Bob.
Hi.
So on Monday, the team that was here, we decided that we need to make some decisions. And in order to do that, we should think far and deep. So we've spent this week dreaming. So the beginning of our discussion today will be a bit about dreams without too much constraints and see what different people have had as their kind of conclusions or epiphanies. I don't know where everyone else is, but since we are being recorded, we could start. Fabienne, you've sent a few things. Do you want to go first or? and chat to them?
Sure. I sent one of the things I sent was a silly show on Netflix about I think 5 guys in a basement or in a barn that are building stuff that kids want, which often doesn't make sense but could be fun, and they still try to build it, and everybody has a good time doing so. And I thought that was a good possibly a good metaphor, analogy of what could be done, that in the end, you never get exactly what you dream for, what you hope for, but as long as the journey is interesting, you meet people, you learn things, you learn from your failure, I believe it is quite valuable. So I thought that was a good way to unwind a bit, let's say. And it's actually also, it's a silly show, but it showcases a lot of skills, like to go from a dream or a seemingly silly idea to an implementation is not trivial. You need to have quite a bit of knowledge, and that usually means more than one head. There is too much knowledge, too much tools to learn how to use. So I thought, again, I think I recommend it for this aspect. In terms of my personal dream, I mentioned some of it already. I think one of the first times I was here. It's to be able to give some, make some ideas tangible, and in the process, being able to juggle with them and implement them. Like we mentioned a couple of times also here, the beauty of having a white wall and then sticking things on it, but also being able to not be stuck at home and then folding that wall in something virtual or digital, and then being able to go anywhere with it, share it with anyone. So this is the kind of thing I want, dream about, but while still being natural, while still having interactions where I can move them around. And I also mentioned on Twitter, I believe, the lenses, the augmented reality lenses. That's also, I'm excited by this. I want this as a medium. I want this as a medium so that, again, I guess the paradox of my dream is I want things to be, I can work on anywhere in any place, in a natural fashion, in a way that I'm used to, let's say moving Post-it notes around or things like this, but still being all online, accessible from any of my devices safely, and including devices like, let's say, the pupils or the lenses that might not take any space, that might be so thin, so light that I don't want to care about devices. So I want to be able to freely navigate through my information, being more creative thanks to it, building more things thanks to it. But while the process itself, the tools themselves are as less tangible as possible. And the little thing on top, but to which to me is self-evident, is I don't want any of this to be locked in any system, no DRM, no proprietary software, everything has to be interoperable, because so there is the philosophical, moral, ethical mindset, but the truth is, even from a just pragmatic perspective, if I want to build more prototypes or get more creative, good ideas, I can't have arbitrary limitations. So yeah, everything there has to be open.
I think that's wonderful, obviously. On your last point about the openness, that's actually written into our pitch documents and into our intentions document, for sure. That's important, unless there is a really compelling reason for a specific experiment to do something else, in which case we would have to decide why and still make that open. But that would be an edge case. Also, I think, guys, that because we need to focus on deciding what we're going to do, this is really the last day of dreaming. I'm going to get this call transcribed, but it will be heavily edited. I'll ask the guys doing the transcription not to include my waffle like this, but only write down the stuff that we're reporting as being part of the dreams. And along with that, because Bob and Carl, you didn't have the opportunity to be with us on Monday, if there's any thoughts that come to you this weekend, feel free to tweet them or email them or whatever. We will put them in, because this should hopefully go out in the issue of the journal that Mark and I aim to release early next week.
Well, I think that what Fabian has said is very good at, and I applaud all of it at the level of being able to move stuff around. There's a sort of, and we haven't named these levels, but so I'm going to call this the linking and move stuff around level. All right, which has to do for me with, the fabulous stuff you do with coding and making this happen. There's another level or multiple levels of this that have to do with intellectual frameworks of subject matters, of the ways that human beings think. And I'm going to name 3 or 4 different ones, but there are 15 or 20 of these, not 1 or 2 or 3. One is major classificatory ways of thinking, which we have ontologies and other classification systems that have happened. There's argumentation, different. This is number 2, argumentation mapping, which is a different structure and has different classes of things in it and different moves in the intellectual operations. There's the timeline, that is the putting, the linking causally of events and processes together over a period of time. Another one, and I could go, as I said, there are 15 or 20 of these. I won't list them, but I've worked on all of the ones that I'm able to name anyway, and I'm sure there are others that need, and others to be invented. But this is a level of thinking about what we're doing. That's just, for me, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's not distinctly different for everybody else in the group, but it is, for me, it is a separate way of thinking about subject matter, which we cobble together these days with, I do with Illustrator, and other people attempt to do with Microsoft Word and other kinds of written things. So my vision is about these is that they become much more stable capacities of the thinking system that we're helping people build, the thinking together system, let's put it that way, because I think that what I've experienced has been that it, in the end, it's a bunch of teams that do a lot of the thinking for the world. And so these become stable and they become supported, they become easy thanks to the whole work on the level that I was talking about, that Fabian and others work on. So my vision is that these are that the levels are recognized soon, and so we can continue to work on them and in our prototypes, our first prototypes even, and then build and perfect them. Many have been identified. I've worked on several of them, and they're, in my view, 80 to 90% complete, but there's a lot of fuzzy edges to them, as in almost any intellectual enterprise there is. So I'll stop right there and happy to answer any questions or elaborate if you want me to.
Yeah, putting an intellectual framework level on this is definitely a different way of looking at it, which is good. Any comments or questions, or would Carl or Mark like to go?
Quick question, Bob, can you please share a link with the ontology of such. Has this been formalized basically?
In various ways, but I don't have. I formalized parts of it in my book, Visual Language, which I'm happy to send to you if you don't have it. And part of it in my book, Mapping Hypertext. Three of the methods are linked, are described pretty well in Mapping Hypertext. The classificatory or the map, the information map, structured writing of stable subject matters, argumentation mapping, and science. Science, experimental science, is another intellectual structure. And also you can download, the link is bobhorn.us. You can download bad digital copies. Somebody scanned these, and of course, what happens is that when you have a scanner who isn't paying attention to what the structure is, I designed the book as a 2-page spread, and they scanned it 1 page at a time. So you can download both of those books, but beware. It'll be a little harder to read than on paper.
And did you already, I imagine, if for example, one of the outcome is the mural, that symbolizes or you formalize part of the process. Do you, I guess when it's yourself doing it, you don't need this to be displayed. So you don't have, for example, on top or below where the mural would be, you don't need reminders for yourself of those steps. But if you do it with others or for others and they want to get a clearer view of the process, do you have, let's say, the mural and then on top, below, to the side, or even, I don't know, like as a stand in front of it, such formalization on how to get that outcome?
Usually if I'm using a framework, I can often I can simply ask them for particular things. For example, on the Vision 2050 one, which you've worked on, I simply have to remind the subject matter people. Maybe that's a third level, by the way, that the actual subject matter of sustainability and climate change is different than the intellectual structures of how to frame these human thought, which is different than the intellectual, the structures that are done in coding and moving and stuff around in either 2D or 3D. So we've got at least three levels there. And so I'm working, putting the, I'm counting on the manipulations to be there in the coding so that I can do the intellectual stuff. And to answer your question, Fabian, I usually, in working with the teams, they don't have the time or interest to, at that moment, learn about the structure. So, for example, in the Vision 2050, I would say, look, what we're filling in the text in this one is requirements. So think as you think about this, what is required in the 2030s to achieve what we're saying we're going to have accomplished in the 2040s, and similarly, and so forth, the requirement. So think about characterizing your climate change and sustainability comments in terms of requirements in agriculture, manufacturing, forestry, blah, 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 all the different kinds of things. So that's how we sort out those, I sort out those with teams. One would hope that we had more formal and stable
That's ironic.
Not stable.
He said stable and yeah, internet connection goes.
And there have been attempts to do it, but education is very, very slow in changing.
For sure.
I'm asking because I'm trying to imagine how to spatially represent, let's say, the processes on with the outcome. So I understand that it's not exactly how it's been done so far, but I believe that could be interesting to visualize the process, and it's especially not as you do it now again because you do it with a screen, so you don't. And plus, you know it by heart. That's a bit different, but I imagine for others to be onboarded and be, that's also a bit of a question, I guess, for you, but for everyone else is the vision you have in mind something that would be, that others could use too, or is it something so personal that you don't expect everybody else or anybody else even to be interested?
Oh well, no. Of the intellectual structures, the class, what I'm calling structured writing, or the classificatory system, which incorporates quite a bit of process, has been formalized. Was run in a company. We trained 400,000 writers in business and government. We trained 400,000. When I left, and I left 30 years ago, sold the company. So one of those systems has been around for almost 50 years it's the standard of writing in business, in technical writing and procedures, policies, and documentation in the major companies. We trained probably 6,000 or 7,000 people in AT&T alone, because they have to communicate with each other, and it's terrible without structured writing. Anyway, then argumentation mapping I helped launch after Toulmin invented the whole notion. And there is a whole subfield in both in coding and in critical thinking teaching and philosophy around the world. And there are half a dozen different, at least software things that products that enable people to do that. It's been held up by the slowness of educators in the high school and junior high school areas. To implement, but some very, very good work, and there's a whole community of people who work on that structure, and so forth. I won't go on, but and by the way, the 20 or so different kinds of intellectual structures of this kind are on one thing on my website also, but I'll send that to you.
Yeah, yeah, that was good. I think we need to keep moving with the dream agenda, but definitely a worthwhile aspect. I see Mark has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Well, it was really just actually sort of a question or observation for Bob in that this is all very pressing, because I've seen it. Part of what he's alluding to is something I've seen on 2-3 big infrastructure or projects I've been involved in. A big gap we have is still broadly an arts sciences thing, where the science edge is too hard edged and the humanities is too soft edged. So at one edge you got people saying, when you say, well, what is it you're trying to do? He said, no, I'm just dreaming. I just do big stuff. Duh, you'll spoil it. If you make me put it in a box, it's ruined. And at the other end, you've got people who are unintentionally trying to over-engineer. And what we lack are people with a skill set in the middle, which is often this mapping from the very formal to the extremely informal. It's something we don't teach. It bedevils large-scale projects. And I think of one where one time we got to the bottom of it, and effectively we had to the requirements people were almost fired to a man and woman, because although they were skilled at what they did was done to no useful purpose, because they didn't actually understand. What they couldn't do is they couldn't bridge between the loose edge and the hard edge in terms of trying to work out a thing we actually had to build, which happened to be the case at the time, was an aircraft carrier, which is, you know, a very complicated bit of thing that has people living in it and lasts for a long time. So there is a big functional gap, and this is actually something I've been reflecting on in terms of looking at things, because if I'm honest, am I excited by VR, having played around with it? No. Not that I think it won't come, not that I think it's not interesting, but I'm not excited by it. And part of the reason I'm not excited is I can't do anything useful in it at the moment. One of the missing parts is that it's too easy to pay attention to the extremes, so the micro code level or the macro loose edge, without this mapping in between. Because if I, you know, one of the things I thought was interesting about Bob's mural was probably for a reason totally different to everybody else. What I saw was a known artifact that we at least know as an artifact in its current form, that rests on a lot of bits of information that are moving, that is although when seen as a mural is a sort of static representation, is in fact a representation of some quite deeply stratified material, and some which is even changing as time goes past. Now, what something like VR ought to allow us to do is to allow all those bits to be movable. But I'm thinking not in anything so trite as, can I move it from this wall to this wall, or can I walk through the middle of it? But just how does the thing that I see, anything that I see, actually link in any meaningful way to all those variable things underneath? And that's an area that I just don't see being addressed. And it's too easy to punt it as it's more than doing another structural ontology or something. It's separate to that. It's part of it is beginning to teach people. And I think we do have to teach people to think that, well, if you want this idea that you have here to be represented there, it's not just enough to have the idea.
But
At
Mark,
some point,
Mark, we did actually set aside time for that this week. That was the point of that, because the next step is exactly what you're talking about now.
that doesn't make sense to me, so I'll stop.
Okay, all right. Anything on dreaming from you, Carl?
I can respond to Mark with one other thing. That is, I attempted in part to deal with not all of the fuzzy connections, but with a process called mess mapping, of messes between organizations and people. And you can download the draft book from my website, bobhorn.us. Scroll all the way down to the bottom and hit PDF on it, and it will arrive on your screen.
Sure, I know. I mean, and the answer to my mind is yes, but I don't think, sadly, very few people, my just experience in a number of working public and private sector things, very few people have an understanding of that, or even have an interest in an understanding of that. And that's right. That's problematic. Sorry?
And they shouldn't, you know, it's only the people that are involved in this that need to be connected. We don't need to teach that in high school.
No, I do. Well, yes and no. I do not.
When you say people, it just, you know, I tune out because
well,
I don't know what people you're talking about.
Right. Well, it's easiest to talk from experience, which is just in the sense of what I see so often is the grand plan going awry because the very sort of skill that you're talking about, let's call it manifested in people, but let's call it a skill, is underpopulated within the organization. You're absolutely right. And this is another problem about collaborative structures, is a lot of people assume that how it works is that everybody needs to understand what I do. I think that's fundamentally flawed. You need to be skilled at what you do, and you need to have an honest and open interaction with the things that you don't understand. And that's the bit that is sort of under resourced. You know, it's not. I'm not trying to put some numbers or lines on where they go, but one of the big gaps is where things come unstuck. Is this the sort of and it's probably quite a small number of people, but who are able to actually produce order from the chaos. And you're absolutely right, Bob. I mean, and there are a number of ways to do it. And it's not as if it's not a known thing, but it's people battered away because it doesn't fit neatly in any of our current disciplines. And I think that's why there's an antipathy to embracing it. And yet it's just clear when you look at any large thing, or you try and take a small thing and scale it out, you need that.
I agree. You don't need to keep, describing it. I agree. And there are emerging professions that are, that have all the difficulties of emerging professions that are tackling this. For example, there are people who try to do murals like mine on the fly while groups are discussing this. They're called visual practitioners, and they have an international forum of visual practitioners that meets every year. And in fact, the local group here in San Francisco is about 30 or 40 of them, and they meet every month. And they do it on the fly in real time. And that's a vision. I mean, put that vision into our virtual reality thing. But there are, there are probably 500 or 600 or 1,000 maybe around the world. Then there's an emerging profession of meeting facilitation, where there are a bunch of different skills that the facilitator realizes there are different kinds of meetings, and you need different kinds of interventions in each of those kinds of meetings.
Bob, I really appreciate what you're saying, but we're half an hour in. And so far, in terms of dreaming, there hasn't been that much. There's been Mark saying why he doesn't want to dream, because he feels you have to look at the structures first.
No, that's totally misrepresenting what
Okay,
I said.
I apologize. Can you then please tell me about how you are dreaming about the future of working in hybrid VR and traditional environments then? I would really, really like to hear that. But usually when we ask the question, including this week, we're met with other aspects of it. But if you want to say that, I would absolutely massively love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I've been thinking about in the dreaming aspect is in a sense how I'm able to interact with ideas or problems or information in something that isn't tied by my current physical limitations around me. So rather than take a rear view mirror and say, can I make a timeline and put it?
Can you tell us what you're seeing? What are your vision, rather than looking back?
Bob, let him talk. Bob, give him a few minutes. He's actually talking about dreaming now. And it may be a very different way from what you're looking at. And, to actually think of the specific visuals now, maybe a little premature.
I mean, yes. I mean, I certainly, when I think of these things, I don't think of it in terms of pictures. In that sense, I'm not but what I do see is the ability to, I've always been a quite non-linear thinker, so I'm slightly contrarian in that view. So I tend to see very well, not by choice, but I find I often see a very different picture of the same information as is presented to others. And one of the things I'm interested in, and where I think VR does offer, is the ability to take something, some information, an idea, some data, whatever, and to view it in a different way. And I'm trying to avoid stating it in terms of things that we have already, because then we're back in the rear view thinking. It's not, can I have a timeline alongside a radar graph or something? But also it's trying to avoid falling into the trap of saying, let's start counting the countable things, because that again leads us off down a garden path where we get seduced by giving extra salience to things because we can count them, not because they're necessarily important. And I'm reflecting on the talk last Friday by Janie, which was talking about, discourse, public discourse and things, and some of the mapping going on there. And I think that's interesting, but I also saw it slightly going down this path of saying people falling into the trap of placing too much information on what they see or what they're able to sort of map, rather than looking at the whole piece and saying, well, why are there great big gaps here? Because that's often where the most interesting thing is. In other words, I find I get most traction in problems by looking in the gaps, not in the overpopulated parts. You're muted, Fred.
So I guess one of the things you're trying to highlight then is you would like to have systems that'll help you look at connections, but also to see where there are no connections or where things are missing.
Yes, and just the fact of being honest with myself that if some of the things I want to see or be able to interact with, let's put it like that, in this virtual environment, I think the visual aspect of it could get overplayed. Because one of the interesting things we talked about is the extra sort of manipulation we have with these things and our ability to just move things in a way we can manipulate things that are not allowed us if we do it in a real physical space. And where that leads me is being sort of, trying to be more honest with myself about, well, if I want to do that, what does one of those things look like? It's all very well to have the idea of it sort of existing, but for it to exist, we're actually going to have to, at some point, someone is actually going to have to make some code to do that. So we need to be generous in our understanding, and rather than, as we tend to do about things we don't understand, say, oh, well, it's an implementation detail, or basically it's a somebody else problem, I don't have to worry about it. I keep putting myself back saying, that's being too generous to myself. So if I want to do these things, what responsibilities does that lay on me to explain what I'm wanting to do, rather than saying, I have this cool idea here, now you go fix it. And then sit there like the person telling their decorator it's the wrong shade of color without telling them what actually color they want, which is where a lot of our work ends up.
Thanks. Carl?
Yeah, I'm kind of at a disadvantage of not having the week to think about things. Just from what I've heard here, I resonate very strongly with things Bob.
Sorry, Carl, sorry to interrupt, but if you, is to give you a dream or it's to go back on Mark's point?
I'll let you go then if you have more in flow with what Mark was just saying.
Yeah, it was, sorry to interrupt, it was because of Mark's remark. What I wanted to say about seeing too much or trying to visualize everything, it is actually an open problem or an open question in the pedagogy of mathematics at the moment, where, as far as I know, there are two camps. One camp that say you need to visualize everything and make everything tangible. And that's actually helping to learn faster at the earliest stage, making anything tangible that you can grab and you make it, even if it's 3D printing or in VR and AR, that actually works. Like you will learn mathematics more efficiently. The problem is up to a point, and at a certain point, except if you're stuck in, let's say, geometry, you will have to be comfortable with abstractions, things that don't exist or can't easily be represented, or if you represent them, it will be incorrectly, or it will be, basically dirty, the wrong version of it. So that's I don't, as far as I know, nobody has an answer on this for now, that if you build a scaffolding that is too visual or too tangible, you might at some point miss some opportunities if you're not comfortable with playing with things that are not there or that you can't represent easily.
Sure.
I mean, just a little bit on the dreaming thing, like Carl said in the beginning, and Carl, I have been quoting Doug a lot on this, dreaming is hard work. Fantasy is one thing. Fantasy is Harry Potter. I do purple flash, do green flash, and then suddenly it's the yellow one that's deadly. Fantasy is easy. But dreaming is very, very difficult. And I think Mark is being really annoying in the best possible way, because we shouldn't just dream the paths that are relatively linear, but we should also dream those paths. I mean, one of the things we really have to do is just a nice simple mural and a timeline. We have to do that. But this week was really to shake our head a little bit and see how far we could get. I have shared a document with some of you of my dreaming things, but what was really annoying for me was, and I think that's in parallel with you, Mark, was the stuff in VR has to be known stuff. I talked to the working group yesterday that's in charge of the Microsoft Word document format. They had their monthly meeting. I presented there. It was really, really interesting. 2 British people, 1 American in Korea, and Todd, who was in charge of NISO, the American National Institute of Standards Organization, was also there. And we talked about the importance of addressability, which, you know, we all get back to here. So at the end of my long, dreamy rant, I have to fix how glossaries work in Author. That's one of my personal things. There are many other things, because if you're going to do something, you know, I dream often when trying to do this of standing in a room. I've got all kinds of little dots in the room. Call them nodes or whatever you want, right? Are they books? Are they single words? You know, what are they? Of course, that's part of our discussion. But then when I want to manipulate them, I'm just, you know, like Mark has been struggling in Noda for all of us for so long. If you just pull one and another, it's kind of boring and stupid. If you want to do operations based on criteria, obviously the system needs to have those criteria known to it. And that's when I realized that for the aspect I'm most interested in right now, I have to fix how glossaries work. Because otherwise I'm going to take it into a VR space. Fabian is going to make something amazing. And then when we interact with it, we're going to have all kinds of ideas and it can't be done. So I completely agree with Mark's anger at how, as a community, we don't look at the infrastructure stuff. You know, we have to dream beyond it, but at the same time, so that means that for what I wrote and what I'm working on, because I'm quite actively trying to get us some funding to hire coders to do some of the infrastructure work, etc. I had to be honest with myself and say that I also need some money to finish Author. You know, the 2D side of things has to be done too. And if we get enough money, then Fabian, I want it to be not just for Mac, I want it to be web-based, but either way, it must be connectable to other systems. With that note, Carl, did you want to go into dreamy stuff? Just randomly kicking about something?
Yeah, well, as I was saying at the beginning, I'm kind of taking a step back and kind of going to the fundamentals for me. And one of them is basically it's focusing at the like network improvement community level for what like looking at Doug's work and stuff. So what's the interface that the groups like Bob was just talking about, people who are facilitating meetings in particular, I see meetings as that's the nexus of where we can have organizational change and things. So what are the tools we need to have effective and efficient meetings? So that's kind of where I'm at. And then it's like, so if we have like really great interfaces for different improvement communities, because people with the different contexts, people might have a whole different set of things they need, but then it's like, can our augmentation system talk with yours, and kind of focusing at that level. So that's how I kind of seeing the future user interface, but I'll just toss that out for now and have to think about things some more. And I look forward to what other people will be saying, and then I can look to build on that.
I think in a couple of weeks or months, we should probably have a session on that, of what networked improvement communities can be, because Fabian keeps hammering on the openness of this. And it's really refreshing to be reminded, because you can't build a NIC with walled gardens. So that definitely has to come into it. But you mentioned future. I'm going to show you a future user. Hang on. Sorry, Zoom being annoying with where the buttons are. Can you all see my incredible screen? So that's today. That's my son, Edgar, whom most of you have seen many times. He got an award for the headmaster. a Jesuit award for having been demonstrating the Jesuit pupil profiles of kindness, etc. Kindness and being able to stick to things. He made a few decisions for Lent. He stuck to them. He's given up his bed so others can sleep in it during the war. He has been absolutely amazing. So I am showing him off without any relevance other than I will show him to everyone. So there, everyone at all points. Yeah, that was kind of an emotional morning for us right there. But okay.
I think that can help to dream also, that sometimes we don't necessarily want to push our dreams to our kids, but I think also to build a better world that makes it a lot more pragmatic, that we can't just have something okay today, but to see how others will use it. I think considering from children right now and also our future adults, what tools, what processes they should be comfortable working with. And just to reiterate, I'm going to sound like a broken clock, but that is also why I find openness so important, that if we build or help to build some of the best or most interesting tools, I don't want some kid in a, sometimes I give workshops also on VR and AR to kids in Brussels. And I don't, at any point, I also don't want any of them say, oh, I want to do this. And then I have to tell them, no, you can't do this because somebody decided you can't. Like, if you want to make, let's say, a virtual workspace for anyone, including kids, that workspace also, and any steps or components in it have to be open source and have to be modifiable. Also, in a kind of being humble enough to not assume that you thought of everything ahead. So I think thinking forward, letting ourselves dreams for ourselves, but also for the ones coming after us, and making sure that they can build on that, I find that usually pretty valuable and inspiring.
For some reason, what you made me think of there is 11th of June, we're having a summer party. And Mark is not very far away. You're not very far away, Fabian. You're all invited if you can make it to London on the 11th of June. Unfortunately, we don't have accommodation right now, but you know, we can look into things like that. But yeah, so this document that I'm trying to write as a pitch document, at some point we have to write what we plan to build. I'm writing a budget for 1 year. And the likelihood of me actually getting the money is not very big. I'm not going to kid you or myself. But outlining this, writing it properly, having a budget, and having Bent and other support does make a difference. And the thing that I'm screaming about the loudest is the whole thing about, we only have a year or two, in my mind, of fresh imagination for humanity to look at VR. Afterwards, we'll all think we know what it is, and it'll be what it is. So we need to decide to build something that will be useful, not just a demo, and will, in some aspect, blow people's minds to keep their imagination going. I think one aspect of that means it has to be hybrid. I think everyone here has said that. It can't just be VR. That's just another toy or another ghetto or a CD-ROM. And then we have to look at what we mean by documents. Of course, we can use Liquid and Visual Meta and PDF, but we're not tied to that, obviously. That's just, you know, I happen to like that because that's what I'm working on. If there are compelling reasons to use other standards, of course we will. And by the way, Jacob is working now on exporting from author to HTML directly. So, you know, there are many ways we can go about it, but we should probably now, despite the fact that there's very few people on this call, spend the weekend thinking, what specific thing do we think we can reasonably demonstrate in, let's say, December, to give us the most time at the Future of Text 11. Hey, Bob, you're muted.
I
Okay.
was muted. Sorry, it was muted. Here's a question. What kind of thing would blow people's minds in a demonstration? Because I think, you know, I read your vision, your dreaming vision.
Thank you.
and I thought, boy, this needs visuals. But it was inspiring to me, although before long, I got lost in, sort of lost in what I could see, you know, because I'm translating what you're writing into what I'm trying to see. And so I'm wondering what it would be that, you know, for requests like this, the proposal, you know, as you said, I'm quoting you, what blows up people's minds. And I'm asking everybody here in the group.
Yeah,
For
well,
the-
also,
For the proposal, maybe not for
Right.
10 years from now, but for now, for this year.
yeah, Bob, it is, it's doing too much thinking, not being able to talk. First of all, Oculus is adding a near future update, which does better screen capture. So it's not just a box, I've heard. So, you know, we'll get something better in many ways. That will help communicate. What I think we need to do, Brendel has already built a way to take JSON into VR and do basic things there. I think that is one start. But one of the big challenges, I think, is you have this thing and you have that thing. How do they know about each other? Right, so let's say this is a constellation of glossary terms from my system. And then let's say Mark has worked in Excel and made a spreadsheet for something else. And Fabian is taking those two things into his world. You know, can he draw a line between them? And if so, where does that line exist? These are really important issues. So I think we just need to start experimenting.
Yes, for me, that the line is needed in the intellectual structures part of this, and then is implemented in the coding and tool level of this. And there isn't much theory that I'm aware of, at least, and I, you know, I can't read everything, obviously, is how do we do the connections between those kinds of levels? That's at least one of the, and not only the intellectual level, but if the subject matter happens to be climate change, then we're talking about linking 3 levels in some sort of way in the coding, in the actual implementation of the coding as we're flying through our VR. Does that make sense to you?
Listening, not getting all of it.
Yeah.
Is that because my internet connection has been bad this morning?
No, just thinking. Also looking at Fabian put 2 links in the chat. So yeah, the thing is, so when I talk to the wonderful people in the doc working group, and I mean, it was one of the most incredible discussions I've ever had, because these people are the ones making the stuff. You know, they're in charge of .doc and .x. So, you know, we didn't agree on everything, but they greatly agreed on the notion of having metadata visual at the end of the document. Of course, they had some concern about messy and so on. And of course, in something like Word, which is a manuscript rather than published format, they were concerned about how that would be dealt with. But the fact that when I presented Visual Meta, which was the key reason I was there is a slide on VR as well. So they hadn't really thought about taking these documents in and out of these environments. So we do, hang on one second. Yes, Edgar, can you close the door, darling? I'm still in my meeting. He's dressed as a ninja, so I could hardly see him, right? They are currently not thinking about VR. Hardly anybody is who is talking about work stuff. Right, so this is where we can be real thought leaders, and this is where the dreaming thing is really, really hard, because at a certain point it's stupid, no question. And at another point, it's mundanely obvious. So for us to foster with us a dialogue where somebody can say something stupid, but because we respect each other, we try to find out what that is. It is really, really important. Because if we manage to publish in our journal either screenshots with links to live VR or videos, or just textual descriptions or pictures, whatever it is, we really are building a body of early thought in this space. Mark used the term rear view mirror. That's obviously a reference to Marshall McLuhan. We're inventing the future by looking at the rear view mirror. We have no choice really, but we can choose how we try to look in that rear view mirror. You're putting all kinds of interesting things in there, Fabienne. Could you turn that into a mini article piece?
Yeah.
Thank you. Because the thing is, to be honest, this often for me becomes really, really depressing. You know, my imposter syndrome thing. You know, what are we doing? We're having a journal and a book about VR. Who the hell am I? Is what I think. And then I remind myself that it doesn't matter who I am. I'm just trying to help you guys put it together. There is no intellectual lead in the world in this area. So if we just let it slip, that's just ridiculous, right? So that's why I'm just begging for everybody to note it down in some way. It doesn't have to be a fully fledged academic article or anything like that. Now, one more thing, I see there are 2 hands up. On the 27th of next month, I'm going to have my Viva, my exam for my PhD. Just got that confirmed today. So if I'm correct, Mark, I will know that day whether I passed with corrections or failed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And essentially, I mean, in a sense, unless you fail, you've passed. It's just how long before they give you a bit of paper proving it, and you may have some more work to do. But I would say my observation of the process up close is that most people sort of treat that as, yeah, pass or fail kind of thing.
Because, yeah, thank you, Mark, because Mark has, you know, we're colleagues and he's actually gone through this. So the reason I'm saying it is I'm thinking of not sending out my pitch document until at least the next day, because in there's a question of who are we as a group and also who am I? And I do put down that I have recently gone through the PhD thing. If I can sign it with a PhD, that shows that I'm at least currently able to have gone through the process. It gives me a tiny bit of credibility. And that gives us roughly a month to put together something nice in the pitch document that shows what we're talking about. Yeah, Carl first, please.
Yeah, I guess, well, part of it can be kind of seeing what is kind of out there and things. It was weird. The thing I'm going to post was from February 2016, although it was weird because I thought it was posted on March 23rd, which happens to be Christina's birthday and stuff. But if you really want to dream, there's not going to be one single daughter of demos, but could like having daughters of demos in January of 2025 for Doug's 100th birthday or something, you know, if you want to kind of dream and stuff. This one really blew me away because the guy's talking about it's the brain operating system, and there should be like a zero learning curve. That's kind of, I mean, there's a lot of interesting ideas he has. I mean, it's called augmented reality headset, and it's what it was there. But there's some that could be part of this too, is kind of seeing kind of what's out there, and then does this spark, oh, that's cool, but can we do this, and that, or whatever too. So just leave it at that and let Mark.
Yeah, thanks for that, Carl. By the way, in this community, unless I am speaking out of turn, we see no difference between AR and VR. Right now, physically, the devices are different, but I do believe that very soon you'll be able to toggle between them. We already have pass-through on VR and so on. So just that was cool for that link. Mark.
Yeah, it's something that was sort of prompted by your comment about this thing of, you know, lines and links and things, but it sort of segues around to the demo really. In that, you know, I'm trying to sort of think, well, you know, what was, yeah, people were blown away by sort of Doug's demo, but in a sense, there were lots of things that you could look back with hindsight and see were there, but weren't necessarily being touted as that. So we only see this really with hindsight. And I'm just wondering, well, one of the really interesting things we could do basically is to show what we see tracked at the moment in various forms of documents as something much more fluid. I don't think most people in the room will find that sexy. So to a certain extent, the cell becomes the visual part of it, but the long term, the intellectual heft of it, or the benefit for the long term is thinking about this. Because so you said, and sort of very, very obvious thing to say, if I take an Excel spreadsheet into VR, and I imagine that the 5 people sitting here were imagining a sort of table-like thing floating probably in their mind, but I mean, that gets to the heart of it. Why is that the sensible starting representation of the information in the spreadsheet? I mean, this is something I'm sure it's being discussed somewhere. I haven't tripped across it, and it was something that I was forced to think about when doing that, playing around with Noda, which was a lot of effort to really know real effect. But the one thing it really said to me is, well, one of the problems about moving something that you have some information that has some knowledge, it enshrines something. In a sense, there is a picture in it somewhere, if you want to put it that way. But taking it in a form that you can even do anything with it when it gets into this new medium is, I think I reminded myself, far harder than I imagined. It's a step beyond saying, oh, I have a picture, I've got a JPEG here, I'm going to make it appear in a space over, in this other space, which even that involves quite a bit of coding at the moment. But there's less surprise in it because you know what it looks like at the end. You're going to see a picture, you're just going to see it in a very different place. But the idea that, and Brandel, took Bob's mural and put that into a VR space, that's really interesting. One of the things we realize is at the moment, the limitation is you don't have the depth of field that you have if you're stood in a room with it. But you could also ask, you could have this as a provocation, say, well, is that, if we had all the information from which Bob's mural was made, is that mural the best way to put it into VR? Which isn't making a judgment on the mural as it exists. It's just saying, with all these other affordances, is this the most useful, tractable form of it? And I don't know the answer to that. And I think that this is one of the sort of chicken egg problems we have, because we're trying to dream the other side of that barrier, and we're sort of, it's almost as if we don't have, again, the Noda experience taught me that we don't really have tools to play with these things very well. So we have the difficulty, we sort of have information, and we have a sense that we could do more with it, but what we don't really have is we don't have the working space to put in. And part of the difficulty for that is that working space has to be built with code, and that code has to understand what it's trying to do. So we're asking to people to build, well, it's the reverse, sorry. It's the reverse of sawing off the branch you're sitting on, and I don't know what the metaphor is for that, but we're asking someone to sort of, build something that we can't describe, and that is tremendously difficult. And I see Fabian's got his hand up. He's going to doubtless point out I'm wrong. So Fabian, take it away.
I think you're wrong on 2 things, or on let's say the proposal of the mural. Again, with all respect to Bob, it's definitely not the best solution in VR, and it's perfectly normal. It's a different medium, different way to interact, as you say, also with some limitation. So it might not be, and it might be full of it, but I would be shocked if taking the mural from an actual wall and putting it in VR was the best representation. That doesn't even make sense to me. I'm sure there are more interesting ways, and just because there are some things that are like, you can add also trivially easily AR, so that when you look at the mural and you look, let's say, at the top left part, then you have additional metadata or information that pop up behind it that you might choose to look at, you might not. You want the references. If you look, let's say, more than 5 seconds at a specific part, then you have the references that appear to the side, and if you move either yourself or the mural. So I'm sure it's not the best solution. It's the best step though, which led me to my other let's say not like criticism is that we don't have to go from the idea or the dream to code, because especially if we can't express ourselves properly, which is normal as we're still discovering the medium, we can actually, and that's my I think I mentioned it at some point about my father and his desire to make a video, is you need to do anything, any step that goes toward that goal. And if that means printing on your black and white printer and stick it on an actual wall and having post-it notes, or if it's using glasses like this from your window and then writing on it just to simulate what it will be, and it's always lower precision, because then a criticism will be okay, but when you do this, it's not automatic, or the text is not processed and whatever. Those are always excuses. You don't need programmer, a developer, or a database in order to start prototyping. You use a piece of paper, a pen, and then if you want, let's say VR, you make it as a box. Like you make 6 pieces of paper, you put it one on top of your head, one on the right, one on the left. It's going to look very silly, but a lot less silly than if you just go from a crazy concept that doesn't actually make sense. So you definitely don't need a developer. You don't need more than a piece of paper and a pen. Of course, the next step will be you will actually need a developer, as you mentioned, let's say a database, transforming the different data and all this, definitely needed. But I tend to be a bit aggressive in terms of excuses that no, everybody wants the final product. And I mean, I say this with respect and passion, but this is what I do prototyping, is to help people transform the crazy idea to something. And everybody is always the same. They have, and me too, it's not against anybody. Like you fantasize about something, and when you do the first steps, let's say piece of paper and pen, it doesn't look sexy. It's pretty, and then you can have some kind of imposter syndrome. It's like, oh, our idea doesn't make any sense, or this is not the grandiose concept that is going to revolutionize everything. And it probably might not, but the process itself, you're going to learn so much that it is valuable. And honestly, it's the only way. The only way is to actually do it and start with low resolution, crappy update, doesn't connect with this or that other devices. But no developer needed, no excuses. It can be done by anyone at any point. And of course, the further steps will involve other people with different skills, including developer. But yeah.
Well, good. I mean, essentially, I agree. And I just quickly, because hands are up things, but just to remake the point. And I suppose that was in my mind when moons ago, when I first sort of made the comment through the comment and said, wouldn't it be an idea to do something with Bob's mural? Because what I saw immediately was, although I saw an artifact in the sense in terms of mural, what I actually saw was a boatload of data behind that. And what I thought I was offering, and maybe I didn't make it plain enough, is the prototyping I'd be doing in that would be pulling together all of this to have some manifest to give it tractability in terms of, well, what can we do with it? So for instance, because it probably exists in one form, but some of those forms can easily be maybe transformed into others. But someone needs to look at that as a whole and take it. So that's one of the things I'd sort of offered to do. And it sort of, there was a resounding silence. So I assumed that there was no interest. So I haven't bothered to take it forward because I've been doing other things. But I'm happy to step up. It's sort of area where that speaks to things that I understand, if only to be able to represent that body of information as other than or alongside a picture, which we have already, but to do some of the things we want to do and to start exploring these other things. And my approach deliberately is to not try and expand at this point the artifact, because that's just adding extra noise in. To me, it's enough of a challenge just to effectively deconstruct's the wrong word, because as Bob said, he's got all the underlying information, but effectively corral it round, put it in a sort of a defined digital space so we know what's there. We've put some metrics on it, and we can begin to tease apart how we can use it in the way that Fabien just rightly said, so that we can walk towards it, because it's not going to leap fully formed out of the ether. I couldn't agree more fundamentally with that observation. Fred.
I'm very happy to cooperate with you on that, Mark. And I'll, if I can begin, unless there are other immediate things, I'll begin right now by saying that the left-hand portion of it is history. And you need all of the logic and methodology and good judgment of historians for putting that together, which we relied upon, those historians.
Yep.
We summarized their data into little headlines. The summary is captured by little fake newspaper headlines, as if what the historians will be describing were actually front page news, but they never were, except for an explosion here and there. So in one sense, yes, it would be quite easy to say in a demo even to go behind one of these events and say, here's the history behind it, and here's the documents of the history behind it. And it would also be possible to critique it, or to say, here's the limitations of this whole collection of headlines, because they are constrained by the British view of the history of the nuclear age and how it impacted on the British nuclear waste issue. So that's constraining of the context of something. And these are intellectual constructs that and he's shaking his head yes most of the time. So I'm thinking we're understanding each other, even though these kinds of linkages between the actual subject matter of nuclear waste and the history of it in the past.
Okay, Bob.
Have not been linked together.
But going back, sorry.
Well, but this is, I think, one of the critical elements in our ability to distinguish between the subject matter, nuclear waste history, the intellectual structure. That is, we're making a networky kind of linear history that could be put into code on the third level. So I'm trying to illustrate that concept that I introduced before.
But Bob, the thing is, our job now with this is to illustrate that working in VR can be useful. It's really, really focused on that, because there are many, many, many areas of information and interaction that needs to be worked on. But I think I disagree a little bit with you, Fabienne, what you said earlier from my personal perspective, because I come from an arts background, Chelsea School of Art and all of that good stuff. I got a master's in HCI. I'm very much about mocking things up and making images and thinking and dreaming. But so for me, for instance, when I designed Author and Reader, yes, I'll do a ton of stuff in Photoshop and click about and use Keynote, absolutely. But in order to really see if it's pretty or actually pretty useful, I had to have it built. The amount of money I've spent on that software is at least twice as much as if I had given a really good spec to the programmers to build it on, right? So what I'm trying to say is that the living and using on real data is so crucial. I have this here next to me, and I go in relatively often, but other than being in immersed, which is so primitive, and just being focused on working on my normal stuff, there isn't that much work activity I can do in VR at the moment that has value to me. So that's why I think it's so important that we get some of our own real data in, and we start with simple things, start with having sheets of paper, murals, whatever, simple things, dots. Because until we're there and we can feel what it is mind masturbation. Not that that's bad in itself, but it doesn't become virtually tangible. It's like trying to decide on the best way to design a bicycle without having been on a bicycle. I know I'm provoking you there, Fabian.
Can I just bottom out something, Fred? I was just interested. So your sort of observation that so Bob was describing the mural work and things, and you were saying there was a sort of but that implied that in some way it wasn't useful to explaining the VR. And I'd just like to tease that out, because I don't have the same reaction. I'm wondering what it is you find it is not useful to the task to do that.
What I find not useful is that Bob has never been in VR. And Bob's work in general is super important. No, there's a point to it, Bob. Bob.
I was in the first VR lab at the University of Washington 25 years ago. Please don't.
Bob, please. Okay, you haven't been in current VR, right? And the thing is, your work is very, very important. I value you on so many levels. But the thing that I think we need to do now is, I can't afford as a group or as myself, look at many different, I've been doing the future of text for 10 years. What a vague thing that is, the future of text. It's gone all over the place. So right now, the only thing is, what is it like to work in VR? And to do that is really hard to understand. I don't understand it yet. I have some vague ideas. So that's why I really strongly feel that we need to focus on that aspect, not all the intellectual levels of knowledge work in general. That's really, really important. And I would be very happy to have separate conversations on a weekly basis on that, because it's super important. But in the discussion now, it really is.
Okay, I think I'm beginning to see the thread here. In that, okay, it's difficult to see. I mean, again, I for my sins, I'm a quite abstract thinker, which gets me into all sorts of difficulty, because I just clearly don't have the same worldview. But I'm listening to Bob saying, I not only see what he's talking about, but I see I immediately see an abstracted framework. One of the useful things of the week I spent trying to just get one set of data into Noda was to realize that Noda wasn't as sexy as I thought it was, because you can build stuff at arm's length, but that's about all you can do with it. So you can play with stuff, and that's fine if you want to exercise a tactile part, but you're not going to build anything very meaningful out of it, or not, that's probably going to go between 20, 30 nodes or not. One of the things that doesn't have to overtake everything. One of the things that I thought, and I'll just surface this so I'm making sure my rationale is here, is that by taking something where we actually have a lot of known information on a number of levels, in the sense it exists, but also for it to get to the point of being used, it had also broadly been, it's not controversial stuff. And to me, that's incredibly valuable, because so often you're not only trying to make something, but you're trying to make the very data, the very information that you look at in it. And that makes experimentation really hard. So actually taking something where an awful lot of the intellectual heavy lift has been done for us, so that we don't have to worry about the in a sense, the argumentation. What we can engage is in the very thing that you said, which is, what does it feel like? What does it look like? If I have this thing, how is it even visually represented in this space? And we've got it not just in the 1 or 2 bits we've made, but we've actually got it potentially in bucket loads. And we may find, for instance, it's more than we can even cope with at the moment. But again, if we don't look, we won't know. And that doesn't stop us doing other things. But I just want to understand why having that is not seemingly useful to the demo we want to do.
Sorry, having what?
Just so I understand.
Having what, Mark? Sorry.
Well, the idea of well, if we take the what I'm calling Bob's mural, i.e. the nuclear industry mural timeline thing, that body of work. If we did some work with that in terms of
Mark, I'm not saying that wouldn't be useful, not at all.
Sorry, okay, it's unintentional, but if you play it back, the riposte sounded like what you were saying is, but that's all very interesting, but I'm more interested in X.
What I was referring to, Mark, what I was referring to was the layers of intellectual stuff above that. To have a mural in VR as a beginning point for how do we interact with it, I think would be very, very useful.
Okay, we're just so we're on the same page. I'm the word mural there to me in the VR space is an entirely conceptual point. I am not thinking of the picture that is on the wall behind Bob's
Well, I am.
head.
I think
Right. So that's why I'm trying to tease this apart, because I think this is really useful.
What do you mean about having an VR space then, Mark?
Right. So, well, we keep going around the houses. We want to have something to show people. We want to do a demo towards the end of the year. Having something that is, has some edge to it, because we can keep dreaming the boundaries further and further back. But my gut feeling is we will not have anything useful to show by the end of it. We can do lots and lots of things at the same time, as indeed we are. But I still haven't heard the point that says, well, let's not take a body of work that we could do something with. So
we haven't discussed that today. I don't think there's been pros and cons of that at all. All I was saying was that Bob was going on all kinds of very important levels of knowledge.
No, he was referring to effectively the implicit metadata behind us, which is a really, really interesting part of the whole thing, and which I see somebody as it, which leads to the power of the demo that we can do.
Mark, of course, metadata is important. Of course, I think that, right? I'm not saying we should have an animated GIF in VR and we're done with it. Of course not.
No, that's all Bob was saying. And that's why I was surprised.
Mark, let's not you and me have a long discussion of what Bob was saying. But we'll keep teasing things out, but we need to figure out what to put in VR and what to interact with at some point in terms of artifact and actual data. Fabienne, you have your hand up as well.
I think you'll regret giving me the floor there, but so it's provocative, but I think, so I'm saying just hopefully pedagogical provocation or useful provocation, but so I don't know how author has been funded and what was the design process and how it went, but I'm going to argue that if you were to do, let's say, author or equivalent in VR, and you do it without silly paper prototyping, you're going to have a lot less money for a result you're going to enjoy a lot less. So I think that's in general, prototyping is a way to get closer to the idea, but this is even more the case for emerging media, just because, or emerging technology, just because the design principle are in the process of being discovered. We don't have an easy rule that say, oh, design this kind of object goes in that position. We're literally figuring out now as we do it, how people then appreciate it or not. So it's really also a term of, let's say, efficiency and funding and how to use the resources. That being said, I absolutely don't mean that making it static or that a piece of paper or post-it note is sufficient. It absolutely is not. And it's, of course, a much lower resolution, I mean, I was going to say non-interactive, but it can even be interactive. I think really most people are not creative enough in the process of doing the prototype that you can have a friend or a colleague that when you touch the piece of actual paper, they switch it, they give you another piece of paper. And that's an interaction. Yes, it does look silly. Yes, you need to convince a nice friend to be there during COVID time to actually play the role of the computer. But there are really good ways to do this. So that in the end, in terms of resource and money spent, that can be done. And the other important thing is you only need my permission or anybody's permission. It can be 3 a.m. on a Thursday night. You had that brilliant idea. You think it makes sense. You don't have battery in the Quest. You don't there is, again, no excuses. not to do it. There are always ways to do that. But then that has, the same way we do, for example, the journal has to be captured and then as a support to explain to somebody or even yourself, someone who would put in the headset, because that can also be done. Like you can bring, for example, in Mozilla Hubs, but another solution, the sketch you've done on paper, some photo you took of it of how you used it, you bring it in Hubs and then use the pen and then you start to draw it. It's not going to look again as nice, but it's one step closer in the sense that you have a visual prototype. It's not functional yet, but it's one step further. And then you invite me or Brendel or anybody who would be eager to actually implement it. And then the level of, how do you say, quality of explanation, being able to converge to the actual same idea, same understanding of your idea, is going to be like an order of magnitude better, rather than the hand waving that we tend to do on camera here. So I really insist for this on the so many aspects where it helps us all be more efficient. But in any way, it's not sufficient to just do paper. Of course, it's not sufficient. It's another medium.
Okay, just to reply to that before I see you also have your hand, Bob. To a certain extent, we all have different ways to communicate and think, right? One of the ways that I do it is through writing. You know, I can do all kinds of image stuff, Photoshop, all of that stuff, but when I write, that's how I do it. So far in the community, the comments on my writing have been almost none. So, you know, if we are all going to let ourselves write stuff, communicate in the way we want and comment on it, you know, Brandel doesn't like writing, he does VR stuff. You know, we comment on that, and same with Adam, right? But when it comes to this kind of interactivity, for instance, the Adam and Brandel taking the mural into VR was a revelation because of the interaction. It could not have been replicated with paper because I do this and it comes towards me. You know, obviously I'm not going to have 20 by 30 meters worth of paper. I'm being a little funny and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but there are some things you cannot do on paper, right? But also what Adam is working on now, he's put some things in our Twitter chat on how do you fold, you know, actually fold it in this way or that way. You know, these are really sculptural things. You know, of course, some of this we can mock up, but you know, I'm 53 years old, and you know, Bob and me are, you know, senior citizens in this community. Both we've looked through lots of different ways of manipulating information. You know, so there's a certain level of history that, you know, we're set in our ways. There's also a certain level of we've tried this already. You know, so many things we've gone through. I've spent so many insane mornings working on doing knowledge graphs, for instance, in Photoshop, especially in Singapore when I used to travel there because of my family, being at Starbucks from 4 to 8 in the morning, doing nothing but focus on that. It's useful to an extent. But you see, Fabien, you have this insane, great thing of really understanding VR to a way that we don't, right? So Mark has invested a ton of time to do nodal stuff. Most of it turns out to be rubbish, which is hugely valuable for us to learn about the interactions. All right, so that's why, yes, I will try to continue. Fabien, I have actually mocked up a timeline in Keynotes in 2D and written interactions around it. So I'm not saying you're rubbish, clearly not, because you're a fantastic prototyper. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that for us who's not as used to VR, to actually be able to go in and actually feel it has a real strong value. And that's why I think we should start with something like murals, which are quite simple. And then, you know, go in there and say, well, what if I pull here? What if I push here? And kind of see how, obviously there's a lot of work for you and Brandel and whoever else might help us with the VR work. Otherwise I feel a bit stuck.
I wanted to capture an idea that Mark named, but did not articulate any further a few minutes ago. And what he called was what he said was the implicit metadata behind the mural. Blew my mind. That blew my mind. That's the one idea that I wrote down from this session thus far. Because what it said to me was that, yes, there would be metadata attached to the mural, and the metadata would be about the different, in part, an important part of the metadata would be about the levels and the construction of levels and all that sort of thing that is implicit in making the murals. That's all in my skills and head, but would need to be articulated as metadata. I mean, it's beautiful. Excuse me, I'm having a big aha moment here in front of you all, and thank you, Mark, for your contribution to it, even though I don't know whether you realized it was a contribution even at the time. I'm finished. Thank you for now.
Very quickly, Fred, I think, and try and circle back and link it to what you're saying, is because I think the point about the implicit metadata is that it's this sort of information, even though we may not have yet defined what it is, but we can posit that it's there, is the glue that you were talking to when you said, when I take this thing here and this thing here, how does this know what that, how do they know they're interrelated? That, yeah. So, and that links to what Fabian was saying. Yeah, we don't have to build all that now. So, I mean, yeah. So in that sense, I'm trying to stay within the metaphor that, so we have a rich bunch of stuff. We know stuff about it now that is made manifest by the making of the object. So we know that there's an Adobe file. We know it's this big, it has this text and things. We may have separate stuff that tells us there was all this thinking about what created this this whole set of information. We have all these other skeins of thought, and we have a fact that actually history time has actually moved since the time of creation. So that's interesting in itself, because there's actually a moving boundary through the thing we're looking at. But even just the fact saying, okay, so this part of the mural is actually some textual information about this. This is a diagram about that. It's beginning to have some understanding of how they interrelate, so that this sort of quite tactile sense that you rightly alluded to, you're absolutely right. I mean, this goes back to my thing where I put stuff in Noda. Fine, I've got all these objects in space. Great. Now what do I do with them? So, instead of the thing of saying, aha, success, something wonderful has appeared, I had a fun looking diagram with which I could do nothing meaningful. And what it made me realize is that in order to make the things that you're talking about be more than just objects in space, we have to in parallel think, because we can't, looking back to Fabian's point, we can't necessarily build all of this at once. But that's useful if it's a plastic process, because the one should inform the other. If I'm sort of constructing a line of thought that can't be supported by the constraints in which it has to live, something has to give. And I suppose I very much come from a pragmatic background where I'd love to have had the money and the power to color outside all the lines, but I've never had that. So normally I've been in the world of delivering deliverable things. And that's not canard against everything. It's more just explaining, sometimes where my viewpoint comes from. But anyway, I just want to again make the point that I actually think we're all talking about the same thing, even if we appear to be arguing at odds to one another.
Right. Just for the sake of clarification, before I give the mic over to Fabian, I'm really surprised with Mark and Bob that you seem to think that I'm not interested in the data or the metadata. I think I've said it is absolutely crucial. There's no point having just a JPEG screen in VR. It is entirely crucial, but it seems to come up every once in a while that it feels like you're arguing for the importance of that, and I'm ignoring it. I'm saying that at this point, I think we take it as a given that we need to really look at the knowledge we take in and how it's structured, so that we can really manipulate it in intelligent ways. And that's why it's now time to look at what kind of thing are we taking in and how do we think we should manipulate it, rather than kind of go back to a discussion on the metadata, because once we decide what we're going to do and with what, that becomes quite crucial. Yeah, Fabienne.
So if you don't mind, I'll be brief, but I'll try to bring you on my little journey of prototyping in VR. I'll try to share my screen. Let me know when you see it, please. Yeah.
Yep.
So it started before, but one thing I could show for was in 2016, so a couple of years ago. And just to share my struggle, like I also like to write. I also have a page where I define new concepts, new words with new meanings, at least as far as I know. So I do enjoy writing. It doesn't mean I'm good at it, but I definitely see the value of it. There is no question there. What I want to share that I've been struggled to transform from a concept, an abstraction to an actual, not even product, but prototype. It's hard for me too. And so much so that I also invested money and time in building tools to prototype for VR. So that's an example where basically I mentioned the 6 faces of a cube that will represent the 3D space you can move in. So what I did was how do you say, paint, for example, very simple during program, and then you go on each face of the program and you can change color, very basic, but then you could see it with your phone or in a VR headset. Couple of years ago, and I did that also for clients, people who did not know VR and they had an idea. I sat at the coffee table and then they told me the idea and I sketched it. And as you can see, I'm definitely not an artist, but that's enough to facilitate the conversation. I also started then to sketch about the process itself. I'm going to zoom in just a bit more from the idea on a coffee stain table, the photo in VR painting, prototyping. And what I highlighted also a bit before is that the price is also more expensive. You have more ideas and every step of the way is usually more expensive. So that's why you have to be so cautious. And also the emotional roller coaster that, that you get the idea, it's exciting, nothing works, doesn't work. So it's also challenging, not just to push it out from the mind to the piece of paper, to a sketch, to code. That's honestly emotionally challenging. And then to an actual visualization of it, where I have the piece of paper with the idea. When I put it, for example, in HUD or in another tool, when I paint it in 3D so that I'm in the space, and then when I load assets, and then you become functional. But it's multiple steps and steps that are iterative with the user or the client or the person who is going to need that. And there are several tools on it. I developed that a bit. And a bit of metaphor. So I'll share that link in the chat. And on a more pragmatic aspect, if some of us are into it, and like I said, it is demanding, but from my experience, it's the most efficient way still. So yeah, one thing that could also be done is a session where some of us, no VR headset required, it's optional, but if some of us want to do, let's say, a 1-hour session where we prototype something, an idea, whatever it is, from whatever we already have, either being words or sketches or even audio source or video sources. And some of us who don't have VR, drag and drop in the VR space or the 3D space. Some of us who are in their headset can grab it, sketch it, draw on top. Then I'm up for that.
Yeah, there's much to be said for that approach. It absolutely works. I mean, when I got my master's in human-computer interaction, that was very key. You know, every step of the way of the design process is more costly. There's no question about that. But at that time, we did have Photoshop and other tools, so we could mock up something. You know, at Apple, they famously do pixel perfect mockups because they need to get a real feel for what it is. And it doesn't take that long in Photoshop to take a screenshot and move things around. So what I would really like, if I do get this funding, what I would like is to have built environments where we do simple interactions, but off to the side, figuratively speaking, there is some kind of a control system where we can change the variables for what the interactions are. So we build a prototyping system, right? So, but because the act of, you know, like you're supposed to do this action in some of them to turn some, you know, very often that doesn't actually work. It doesn't get that thing. So that's really annoying. But this works. And there are so many things you mustn't forget, Fabian, in the same way that I'm a Photoshop expert on absolute top level, you're a VR expert at top level, right? So the process you're describing is fantastic when you have the deep knowledge of what the later steps could be. We're too ignorant for that. Well, I am anyway. You know, when I put my headset on and I want to do something, you know, we have so much to learn. Just a simple thing as a good friend, Keith Martin, I think you met him here. He takes 360 pictures, puts them in VR with some video and things. He had told me that the tripod should be a bit lower than your head, not higher, because otherwise it'll feel weird. You know, that's something you could only know once you've been in the space. And once you're in the space in VR and the Oculus and you're looking, the fact that it's a 360 flat dome, but you can still move your head and move around a bit, it really gives a feeling that we couldn't have pre-guessed. So that's why I'm hoping we can build some kind of specific testing environment. And I think the things to build, and don't forget, Doug's demo was him talking about a shopping list of the home. Sorry, I'll have to answer that in a second. Clearly, timeline is useful. Clearly, mural is useful. Clearly, an academic type document is useful. But yeah, can you call Grandma back and say I'll call when I finish this? But yeah, because obviously, sorry, my mother's been having scans. She has a fractured spine. That's not very pleasant. Right, so to make this real and to be able to do what you're saying, Fabian, as well, we need to decide on the gosh darn artifacts we're going to work on. And I have suggested 3. Are there any artifacts other than timeline, mural, and documents which you guys think should be considered for initial work? Or should we look within one of them and basically pick one?
It isn't, but a timeline is a document essentially. That's forgive me, but I don't quite understand the difference between the two.
Right. When I say document in this context, I said academic type documents. So I'm thinking about something that has page 1, page 2, references, all of that good stuff.
So you mean linear text document is a piece of linear text? Let's not, if we take the word document out, because that's confusion.
Let's call it a book. Right, a book, a timeline, or a mural. Now, of course, one of the dreams is if you have a book or a text document, within that, you should be able to have a timeline and a mural, just like you can have pictures and figures. So I don't think there's any question that at some point you want to be able to open a document book in VR and there's a timeline and you make it the whole wall. Absolutely. And here's a mural thing. It may be this tiny in the book, but you slam it up against the wall and now it's room size. That kind of stuff, absolutely. But now that we've done the whole dreaming thing and looked at lots of different things, what are the actual artifacts we want to build?
Well, before I answer that, I'll just quickly go back to Fabian's thing and say one thing that I'd be really interested, just to pick up your point about prototyping, is that one thing that is to explore this thing of what does information look like when it turns up? Data, call it what you will. In other words, whether it's, you know, it's easier to think something like a spreadsheet because text is already sort of semi-formed. Basically, if you've got a bucket of numbers that have some meaning, you know they have some meaning. How do you take that into a space? And then to go back to Freud's thing, I actually think that I'll say it again. I think a way that addresses all the things that you've mentioned would be to take I'll call it a body of work rather than Bob's mural, because that's what I see it as. And a body of information that currently manifests is most obviously manifested as a diagram, as a large picture but let's not get stuck into that. There's this body of information that within it has text, it has a book, it has a timeline, it has a sort of a visual component, it has layering. So it basically has all of these things wrapped up into one already existing data set. And within that, we can explore all the really important things you've mentioned, like, well, how do I shift from one visualization to another? Or do I want them all side by side? Or how do I zoom in out of scope? All very pertinent things. But I think basically sitting there in front of us is something that's going to make things a lot easier, even if we only use a fraction of it. Because everything we don't have to think up to work with is a win. I would say from experience. So I don't think that runs at all counter to what you're proposing.
So are you saying you want to start with a mural?
No, I want to start. I don't want to call it a mural because we're getting hung up on visual terms. The data.
Okay. Mark, what would you call the tangible artifact that when someone dons a head-mounted display and goes in to interact with, how would you characterize it? What would you call it?
Well, that's the rub. That's the very thing that I was alluding to, and I said to Fabian, this is the thing I don't know, and I desperately want to not presuppose. I can totally see that if I want to read a book in a VR space, I might like to have it manifested like a sort of facsimile of a book. The one thing that really excites me about the thought of the information contained within the picture behind Bob at the moment is not to think of that as something tacked to the wall, but as a bucket of information with all sorts of interesting different visualizations and terms. And I don't know what the best starting thing is.
Okay, all right.
I feel I failed. If I just say, oh, I want that picture in the thing, then I feel I failed the process, because I'm not really engaging with the challenge of saying, how do I take this information, this idea, this picture, and place it in this environment in a way that makes it more tractable to all the wonderful new tools we have.
Okay, fine. Fabian.
So to me, yes, those three types of items make sense. Book or a document that includes text with multiple paragraphs would also fit a mural. So all that for me is fine. As long as we start with one of those and we figure out 1 week later that actually that doesn't work, and it has to be a research paper instead. We need to say it's a research paper with the 3 letters word I'm not going to mention because it's taboo in this group, or HTML or whatever. So I'm fine with those for a start. Doesn't mean it's set in stone and we can expand. Now briefly to go back on Mark's remark, let's say on dropping a set of data or number in a VR space. I'm going to be a little bit a tease, but that's what I hope to dig a bit more on my overdue presentation or a librarian moving walls around. One thing though that could be useful to give a bit of a taste is the grammar of graphics. I don't know if some of you are familiar with that, but yeah. So the idea that, yeah, you can have a representation, that representation can have an easier to consume meaning in a certain format with so you can imagine that, but push it to more 3-dimension and freedom of movement with also interaction, because I really don't think just seeing a document is enough. I really think overall, consuming a document efficiently to me means also interacting with it in some form, even if it's just pushing annotations to it. But yeah, you have to push back against the document. So yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
One of the difficulties is in that you and Mark were having just before was trying to decide on a class name rather than on a specific document. Now, and so it was things like Bob's mural is what Mark was talking about. Things like the book that Bob wrote. All right, we'll put it that way. So we have a specific thing, or we have things like a whole class of things like those. And you were just arguing, it seemed to me, between what to call the class of those things and what to put in the classes. And there are methods for doing that. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good. For naming those kind of things, but you have to agree, and you have to agree what it is you're trying to agree on. So that was my thought about what was going on there.
What we have to agree on exactly is what thing shall be taken into VR and taken out again, because we all agree it has to be a hybrid environment. So when something is in VR, I think we all expect it to be at a certain point, maybe not initially, but a certain point, extremely interactable to the point where the original name of it, like, this thing is called a phone. We don't use it for phoning anymore, where the name falls away. But we do have to decide on initial names for the artifacts. And I think the best thing would be is to start with a document in the sense of a linear book type document where we use different means to encode the metadata, because a book type document should contain all the other type information. There should be possibility to have a mural. It should be possible to have a timeline, a map, all these other things. And if we can do that, if we can safely take it in and out of a VR environment, do very rich views of it, then over time, I think we can decide more on how these different components are interactable. Fabian?
A quick clarification needed for me. I mentioned the interaction before, but for example, is a notebook a book? So I'll show it just to make sure it's the same thing. But for example, quite often I use this kind of things to learn about a topic or to discover, so that I do have text, but I also have widgets. And then those widgets are going to change the rest of the document, including visualization and data and all that. To me, that's a modern book. Yeah.
Is this like Jupyter Notebooks or what is it?
Yes, it's exactly like Jupyter Notebook.
Right.
It's JavaScript, but it's the same idea. So would that be a book?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm basically, for the long term, I want at the end of a work period or product to be able to produce a PDF. Doesn't need to capture everything, but a lot. Because we went through Flash and we went through early VR. Those things are all dead and you can't find them anymore. So that's why I think at some point a document should come into it. I just got an email now, the Dublin Core, the metadata standard, they want me to talk to them on Wednesday. So they are also desperately understanding the need for something like visual meta at some point in the workflow. The head of Dublin Core was at the meeting last Friday. So recently. So there is a hunger now because of all the shit things happening in the world that we can't just aim for elegant. We also have to aim for practical. So what you're talking about there is crucial. It's also very Brett Victor-like, of course, that kind of interaction. Vint Cerf calls it computational text. Any maths in any document, anything should be able to, this is what has frustrated the hell out of me for at least 15, 20 years, that this is not normal thinking. And the reason I'm now jumping up and down on VR is because when you show something like that, us in this community, we get it. It's absolutely super important, but other people don't. So whether that counts or not, I don't care to a certain extent. If you think it counts, you put it in, great. But what really has to happen is that when these traditional things get into VR, that level of, wow, you can do that, can happen. Because what we're fighting is a PR war and a political war. Right? All those amazing futuristic text things like what you showed, there isn't a market for it because people's imagination isn't there. I know I usually end these calls on this standing on a rock screaming thing, but we really are at the nub of it now. If you want that to go in and out, I'm extremely happy to support that. Yes, Fabian, please.
Finicky, maybe a bit pedantic of me, but you mentioned, I forgot the word exactly, but you said these traditional kind of documents, and well, maybe I'm a bit behind there, but I don't think those computational documents or all the different ways and the virtualized way, well, at least I would argue they were definitely still new for most people. They're as new as VR for most people. They're not necessarily familiar with it. They're not necessarily thinking or reading this way, let's say. I think a lot of people still see a book as a passive item that they're on your shelves. And why do I mention this? Not to just be pedantic, but in the sense that if those documents or those books or the computational books are still evolving, they're not necessarily evolving slower than VR. So it might not be trivial to be able to integrate it in the sense that they are still changing and evolving.
In my dreamy document thing, one of the things I talked about is I also prefer to read on paper, believe it or not, right? Oh, sorry, there's another copy. I bought so many of these to give to a few people. One little thing is I should be able to read a paper book, do my annotations, put on my headset, the camera's good enough that I open up, just flick through the annotated pages. It understands what the annotations are, goes finds on the stuff. So when I'm in a VR environment, I can say everything that I've annotated in paper book, I want to see it like this. But it's easy for me to say to you guys, I want to see it like this. The actual interaction, we will have to experiment with. What does this mean? Does it mean far away? Does it mean where my hand is? Something that Noda really points out. You don't want things too close to you, right? That's what I mean about that. So when it comes to the imagination, what I have invented with author and reader, it is not as advanced as Jupyter notebooks and stuff, but some of it is much more advanced than anything else available in the world. And I'm not saying that because I'm a genius. I am not a genius. I picked some low-hanging fruit inspired by Doug, but there just isn't the real gobble market for it. I was on the BBC with Vint Cerf in December talking about this. Our sales increased nothing, right? So supporting lots of work within this is fantastic. But if all we managed to do in December is to take one of Bob's current murals into VR in a fun way, because liven it up a bit, and in there suddenly you can start deconstructing it and see what the different, let's say it becomes a fancy 3D image map. That in itself would be really worthwhile.
I think it's an interesting point. I mean, listening to Fabian describe things like, Jupyter notebooks and things. I mean, I suppose partly I look back and really my main work tool since 2004 implicitly has multiple sort of view states in it. So I suppose that informs my thinking, and maybe that's why I appear to be speaking from a different place. I just don't tend to think of things so much now. I mean, I know if I'm working in Word, I'm making a Word document, but most of the time I'm working Tinderbox, and basically any node in that can be all sorts of things. And it happens to be the tool has these built in. I'm not saying that's shill for the tool. What's relevant to it is when I reflect now, I've worked in an environment where that sort of flexibility, that am I looking at a timeline? Am I looking at some spatial map? Who cares? I just flick a button, it's done. It's that sort of bit, I'm already living in that space, it's albeit trapped within the space of a screen. And there are many things it can't do. So again, I don't want to oversell it, but I guess that's why it doesn't surprise me, this idea of active documents. And in a sense, it's how has it taken so long for people to get there? But I think my reflection from supporting the community that uses the same tool I mentioned is most people find it really, really, really hard. And regardless of their background, regardless of their intelligence, most people find it really hard to conceptualize one set of information existing in sort of two visualizations at once. if I hadn't seen it and had to teach, in a sense, people through that barrier a lot, I wouldn't make that statement. Because it sounds slightly contentious, but again, if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't think that was the case. And it certainly has nothing to do with knowledge or level of learning or attainment. It's something different.
Yeah, so I see, in addition to that, we're really running out of time. This last Fabian thing about Remarkable and VR, I love Remarkable, but to me, it's too much ghetto, so I can't really use it. So I absolutely love your integration into different things. Definitely something to do. So I think first of all, as you know, these meetings are recorded, they're transcribed, but also the chat log is also put on our blog. So they are always searchable, always findable, and we can always look at ways to get in. But the act of opening a book in VR is a fascinatingly huge issue, right? Let's say that we have one with all the metadata, whatever it might be. You open it as a traditional book, just to simplify, then what? Right? This is the kind of stuff I think we can experiment with. And here, absolutely, pen and paper, drawing, photographs, yes, Fabian, no question about it, right? But let's say I decide I'm going to have the mural there, the pictures there, blah, 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 make an amazing thing. How do I then store that so that someone else can view it in the same exciting manner? Like my remix of all this stuff. I think that these are really core questions. And I think we just need to put some kind of stake in the ground and say, hey, we're taking documents in and out of VR, and we're going to keep working on our imagination, our writing, our mock-ups and implementations of what does it mean with the different elements in there.
Well, I'd like to propose a specific mural. The Vision 2050 mural that we made is now 10 years old, but it's relevant. And there's also a book that is it's only 40 pages, but it's a book that I wrote that contains the mural. It contains it, and it contains parts of it as well. It was co-authored by 3 other people, and introduced by the past president of Stanford University. So it's a book, even though it's small, and it's all about sustainability. It's an important topic. If we could use that, and I have sent all that to you all before. You should be in your files if you're keeping a Horn file, or some other, or a future of text file. I suggest that that's what we use, at least to refer to. And then if we're going to talk about murals, when you say murals, you mean murals like the one that we have and we're talking about.
I think that's absolutely fine, but I also think it is absolutely, completely crucial that it's also live data. I desperately want to be able to put my own documents in there, because I remember that, when I showed my mother-in-law a globe thing I'd made, what did she do? Talk about how cool the tech is? No, she wanted to show her city where she grew up. That really awoke that in me. And I think what you're talking about, yes, we should look at doing that, but also it really needs to become part of our workflow, our own documents, whether you use Author or Word or HTML or whatever. We have to figure out ways to allow you to experience your own stuff or your own community in a live discussion.
Well, that's just a different data in the same framework. I don't see a difference between the two.
The difference is, I agree with Bob, we should try to do that, but we shouldn't constrain it to only building it on his data. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but you got to use some data. That's a full. They're really, because in a sense, if say you wanted to add your reflection on this, I mean, so the whole idea of this is you.
Mark, I want the journal in.
Annotation.
I want the journal. I think that is also an important data set. Our journal that we do every month should also.
Well, this is not a zero-sum proposal. I really don't. I'm not sure why there's a.
I don't understand why you're even talking about this, because I said we can do what Bob wants, but I don't want to be constrained to, because he said he wanted that to be the data set, the mural in the book. I said we need to also have other things in there.
Well, I understand so it's the main reference data set.
Name it and say, and propose it to the group, and we send, okay, that's fine. And then we put that in a list in the journal so that we're all talking about the same thing.
I'm proposing that at least the journal goes in there. But it doesn't have to necessarily be that, because we're talking about computer data, obviously, which means that it shouldn't be that detrimental to our work thinking and workflow to be able to make new stuff continuously to put in there. I don't think we have to work with a very specified data set. But if our focus is some sort of document wrapper in and out of VR with a really rich view in VR, then we should be able to put in what we feel is relevant for our own work, right?
What I'm trying to do is make it the beginning of a table of contents of what would be in the demonstration. I'm happy to put your journal into the table of contents. And, but I'm not happy to put in general comments like not necessarily blah, 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 because that's very hard to get into table of contents and then to make a demo about it.
What do you mean table of contents?
I mean, a list of the items that will be manipulated in virtual reality.
In the demo.
Yeah, but
Maybe
guys,
chapter one, a list of the items that will be shown in the virtual reality demo that this group makes.
yeah, but guys, if we can open one document of a certain type, we can open any document of a certain type.
Now you're talking about a class of documents. I'm
Yes.
talking about the document that we're going to talk.
I don't want to have just one document. I think we need to be able to deal with a class of documents, because
That's why I have a table. That's why I have a table of contents. I'm adding.
Bob, I'm not interested in only working on a demo for how to deal with one particular mural. See you later, Fabian. I want to be able to work with my own data in VR. When I'm working on the journal or reading back issues, that's one thing. If I want to write my own thing for my own purposes and manipulate it in VR, I think that is really important.
Let me try and square the circle here, which is that imagine that the thing that you had written was the journal. That basic, it's as simple as that. It's just a specimen. It's an instance of the class of the documents.
Yes.
And so in that sense,
yes,
it is already your document.
Yes.
The thought experiment is that you have produced this document, and this is this is a way in which you can do it. It helps to have something that already exists, because it's
we do. We have 3 issues
bounded-
of the journal.
Sorry?
We have 3 issues of the journal that already exist.
We're switching what the frame. You switch with the frame.
Yeah. I mean, there's no really. I mean, you
Right.
could.
What I hear,
devise a journal,
when you guys are not talking over each other, what I hear, and I think may be the misunderstanding, I think I heard that Bob wants us to start with one book and one mural.
I want to start. I thought we were trying to envision a vision today, and then we were trying to envision what we would use in a demonstration for this, to get some money for this project. That's what I thought the frames were. And so that's what I'm making a table of contents of. And it's that simple. It's not excluding anything else that you want to do. But if that's what I thought we were talking about today, although, we tend, like most groups, to go off in all sorts of directions. Because we jump out of the frame all the time. We want to have a different frame. That's my experiencing of today, anyway.
I just say I don't see the two as antithetical. The journal as yet is ill-defined. It will be
I mean,
with
what do you mean ill-defined?
something we're working on. Because there's no reason that it can't be part of the demo. At the moment, one of the things is compared to the mural, the Vision 2020, whatever. The one thing the journal isn't yet is it doesn't actually have as fixed a structure, and I know that because as someone trying to help edit it, I still don't really know. We don't have a clear document. We don't have a style document. We don't have a clear list of things that are in it, and more as importantly, what's not in it. So that's got some clarification to go. It doesn't mean it's certainly something that we would be able to show in as part of the demo, because the very same ideas and deconstructions that we can use to use the Vision 2050 stuff, we can use with the journal. So I don't see them as in any way, shape or form antithetical, but it's certainly be easier to start getting traction, I think, with data that already exists rather than data we're actually in the purpose of making at the moment, course of making, should I say.
I used the journal the other day. I used it to find some, well, first of all, I was looking for some links, and they were there. Thank you very much. It made it easy, made my life easy and different. And it also attracted me. And what attracted me was you're putting boldface headlines in frequently. That enabled me to scan what I wanted to do and skip what I didn't want to look at. So that was my, there's a user reaction if you're interested in user reactions to the journal. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, it's good, Bob, because funnily enough, Fred and I have been discussing this thing. I mean, for my part, I actually, it reads to me as visual noise, but I don't mind because I'm just one viewer. So one of the things actually we're doing in the current version of the journal is to just make the point as to what these ad hoc boldings are, because they do exactly. If I know that, if I know that's what it is, and I say it at the top, then it's easier. So that's that's really good to hear that feedback.
Okay, right, okay. All right, yeah, I don't know. I think there is a lot of stress around these discussions, which isn't really necessary. Very, very different perspectives. So yeah, I'll see where we go.
Right. Thank you. I've got a phone call. Oh, what have we got here?
Okay, well, take care then.
All right, bye.
Bye.